OK, Freddie, what question have you got for us?
So this is a question from Luke, who asks, could a Starmer win in the UK and a Trump win in the US spell the end for the special relationship?
Well, this is a good question. It's obviously a conversation that's happening within Labour as well. I mean, Trump is a thin-skinned character, and there's a lot of prominent Labour politicians who will still be around, probably, if he wins the election, who have condemned him. I mean, Sadiq Khan is an obvious one who he's clashed with many times. But then more significantly, David Lammy, now Shadow Foreign Secretary, likely to be the next Foreign Secretary, who campaigned against his state visit when he was president and has called him a racist KKK Nazi sympathiser, women-hating, neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath, and a profound threat to the international order. And I think even Donald Trump wouldn't take those descriptions as a compliment. And Keir Starmer himself, early on in his leadership, he told Boris Johnson to go and tell Donald Trump about the UK's abhorrence at Trump's response to George Floyd's death and the subsequent protests around it. And he also said responsibility lay with Trump for the Capitol riots as well. And even recently, he sort of implicitly criticised Trump's suggestion that NATO nations that don't pull their weight are sort of fair game for Russia by saying, I will always stand up for our allies, even if others threaten not to. So there is quite a lot of antagonism there, I think. And I actually asked John Healey about this, Shadow Defence Secretary, when I interviewed him. And it was really interesting because he was such a well-rehearsed and smooth interviewee. You know, he's a real veteran. He's been around for nearly 30 years. But on this question, when I put to him Lammy's comments, he actually paused for ages. I even had to put pause in the transcription to remind myself to try and think about what to say. And he didn't deny that there would be challenges in the US-UK relationship. And he also said it will require a good deal of work for a new government, i.e. a Labour government, and the relationship needs to be renewed. So he didn't deny that it might be tricky. But he did emphasise that Labour will want to keep the US as its closest security ally, and vice versa. So clearly the focus will be on diplomacy.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just to question whether there is a special relationship, I think sometimes when you ask Americans whether that exists, they say what special relationship. So I'm not sure there's much to end there. Of course, the US and the UK have a close relationship, and I don't think that's going to change if Starmer gets into number 10 and Donald Trump goes into the White House. I think, as you just laid out, Anoosh, there are so many quotes which could annoy someone like Donald Trump, who's so thin-skinned. But from Labour's perspective, they're going to be, I think, extremely pragmatic about this going forward. David Lammy and Keir Starmer have been very clear that they're not going to be sanctimonious or moralistic, or look at Donald Trump and say he's so morally repugnant, we're not going to engage with him.
Yeah,
they're not going to do that. They've been very clear that their foreign policy will be very practical. We've seen that with David Lammy. I think he's been on 44 trips abroad since he got the role. You've seen it with his remarks about India, about how close he wants to work with Modi, and I think there is perhaps a humility in Labour's foreign policy at the moment. I think they'll look at concepts like Global Britain, like the Indo-Pacific shift that the Conservatives have instituted in the past few years, and say, well, that's probably beyond our means a little bit, and we should also recognise that many parts of the global south have been extremely annoyed with how we treated them during the pandemic. There's also concerns about how Britain's support for Israel in recent months has isolated some countries in the global south. So there's sort of the challenges that the David Lammy and Keir Starmer are going to be grappling with. I don't think they're going to let a Donald Trump presidency stop them from collaborating with the White House. It's just potentially whether the White House has a different view on that. Yeah,
and there is a pragmatism in terms of, I think Healey was saying this to me as well, whoever wins, whether it's Biden or Trump, the US is sort of departing the scene in terms of Ukraine, and the UK and other NATO countries will have to step up a bit more in terms of their role there. So there's definitely a shift towards a focus on Europe, no matter who will be in the White House. Yeah, completely. I mean, this is central to what Labour want to do once they get in, both in terms of defence and foreign policy. They've said quite explicitly they want to get a European security pact done very on the back of a German security pact, which will include greater cooperation over trade and supply chains and training and long-term planning. So that's going to be their immediate focus, and I think they want to see that happen quite quickly. Of course, that in a way gives them a little bit more
security in the face of Russia's threat, even if Donald Trump either withdraws support for NATO or is less inclined to come to their defence. So that's certainly going to be their priority. But also it shows that they're going to be less focused on the Indo-Pacific. I mean, of course, it's a really important region, and David Lammy's been there. We've just seen Catherine West, the shadow Asian minister, go to China. So they're going to be highly engaged in that regard. But they've also been quite clear that the focus needs to be on Europe straight away. Yeah,
and it's worth mentioning, actually, our political editor, Andrew Marr, has a piece in The Issue that's out this week on Labour's foreign policy plans. And he reports that Lammy, who is already well connected in Washington, has been speaking to Republicans. So he mentions the former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, the Ohio senator and author of Hillbilly Elegy, J.D. Vance, who we had an interview with recently, who could be Trump's running mate. He's one of the figures tipped to do that, and the former Trump National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien as well. So he has been making links with Republicans there, and he also reports what you hinted at, Freddie, which is sort of Labour is saying, well, if we're not too snooty about Trump, then we can rely on his transactional instincts for him to sit down with Starmer and realise that it's worth having a relationship with a Labour-led UK government to find ways towards a free trade agreement even.
Wow.
I mean, that seems quite ambitious.
It does seem quite ambitious. I think the Trade Department and especially when Liz Truss was there, has recognised that they're more likely to get agreements with individual states than they are with the United States. And that seems to be the priority. We've also got this India trade deal going on at the moment. Jonathan Reynolds, Labour's shadow business secretary, was actually in India this year to try and to show that Labour would still be committed to the deal, because the Conservative government has had some trouble getting it over the line, which is not what they hoped at all. So there's lots of priorities, but I think you're right again to draw out the connections between so many in Labour's team and Washington DC and the establishment there. David Lammy went to Harvard Law School. Keir Starmer worked very closely with the White House when he was DPP, both over extraditions and with the Department of Justice and their Africa strategy. There were lots of connections there, which essentially just means that they know the people, they know the scene. We saw Rachel Reeves go to Washington and meet with Janet Yellen, the US Secretary for the Treasury. So I think they're going to be quite comfortable. We've got to remember that it's not just the relationship between the Prime Minister and the President that matters. It's the relationship between your Foreign Secretary, but also your Foreign Office, your security services, your trade departments, your DOJs, your Ministry of Justice, your
central banks,
your banks, everything. So they all works together, and I think so many of those connections sort of transcend the day-to-day political churn that we often focus on.
Thanks so much for watching. We'd love to know what you think. Please make sure you leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed watching this podcast, you can watch more of our videos on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe.